We have an incredible drought on the planet right now of future leaders. At the moment, global leadership is 10% women and 90% male. Why now? There are three things happening on the planet that culminating to create an absolute need while we have this leadership drought.
Vicki Tyler is an accomplished Kiwi-American speaker, leadership trainer, mentor, and entrepreneur. She's the former president of Flight Centre USA, a $4 billion travel company, known for traveling 40 countries, nearly dying twice, and building resilience and leadership skills for young women in a post-COVID world.
So 18 to 22-year-olds, a lot of them missed out on those uncomfortable situations that we get in the workplace. And a lot of us were locked down for a big piece of that. And we learned some really unfortunate behaviors. For young women in leadership, if they can recognize one thing, is that we're scrolling on average 2 kilometers a day now. What we're sort of almost required to do or inspired to do is to like or scroll, like, scroll, like. So we're judging in a way. When somebody says something that we don't like, we judge it, versus leaders will seek perspective and ask you why. I had an accident in my early 20s that really lit me up. It was, I actually had 2 back-to-back near-death experiences that I've used AI to help me determine I'm 0.045% lucky to be alive, let alone not in a wheelchair. My big mission is to help women in particular go big. How do you inspire people to go big without near-death experiences?
Yeah. How do you know that you're a leader?
It's a really, really good question.
So you're on a mission to disrupt all of that?
Yes, absolutely.
Quick one, Mina here. Thank you for watching this episode. I appreciate you. Thank you for all your support. One thing that you can do for me is to please hit the subscribe button below. A lot of people who come and watch this podcast or listen to the podcast are not subscribers. And so we're trying to increase our subscriber base. I promise you that if you hit subscribe, I'm going to work hard to make sure that my episodes are really good, that will get better and better. So, do we have a deal? Okay, back to the episode. Vicki, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to see you. I'm really excited about this conversation because you've got a mission in life and I believe the world need to hear it. So what is your vision and mission?
We have an incredible drought on the planet right now of future leaders for 3 reasons, which we could cover later. So I am doubling down and creating a wave of future women leaders the planet needs and arming them with confidence and skills so that when those leadership opportunities arrive, they are at the front of the pack. There is absolutely no question that they are the obvious choice for the next leadership opportunity.
I love the word drought, even though it's not a pretty word, but it's a powerful word that you used to describe the situation. Clearly, there's a whole problem that you're trying to solve and you're equipped to solve. And you've got this background that I would love to get into because it's a goodie. For people who don't know you, I know you a little bit. And I know that you've got this adventurous spirit about you and a love for leadership and actually being a leader yourself. And you've also traveled a lot. How many countries actually have you been on so far?
Just clocked over 40. And as you know, the list gets longer, not shorter.
Love it.
Yeah.
40 countries. Why are you traveling?
Well, it was interesting. I sort of stumbled into it and the nature of being part of the Commonwealth, right? We had this 2-year, or back then it was a 2-year working visa opportunity in the UK. So this sort of rite of passage, a pilgrimage, if you like, to the UK if we wanted it. So I started at 18, went for 4 months, and then just doors kept opening and I kept sort of just going through them. And I call it really the University of Life because I was gone for about 5 years.
5 years?
Yeah.
Traveling? I do know that people go away for maybe like 6 months or a year maximum, but 5 years is a long time.
Yeah.
You must have learned a lot from it. Like, what did you learn from that trip?
Gosh, that's a great question to sort of unpack. But if we keep it on point, what I learned was resilience, because
Love that.
it doesn't matter, what age we are or what part of the world we're traveling in. All of us know that, even dealing with airports and planes and trains and
logistics.
Adversity or challenges pop up. So that, running out of money, I basically it was a working holiday. There were no cell phones or phones. I would call home, collect, unfortunately for my poor mama, usually at 3 a.m. once every 6 months. So it was really, I was on my own, just earning my own money and navigating job interviews and trying to create resumes on the fly and dealing with difficult bosses and trying to have a lot of fun and, but it was the people that I met that made it exceptional, but also made it challenging. And that's where I think the leadership elements come in, learning how to navigate challenging situations and challenging people.
Because clearly this travel experience that you've had has shaped your perspective, your view on the world. Of course, plus your work experience, your career. Can you tell us a little bit about your work? So understand that you've been part of the Flight Center USA, the president, and I'd like to get a bit of a glimpse into why that was so significant for you.
Sure. Yeah. No, when I came back from traveling, I started a job with Flight Centre when they had 8 retail stores in New Zealand and 30 in Australia. So they were small, and now they're a $4 billion company with in over 8 countries and lots of brands underneath their umbrella. So it was extraordinary being part of that startup and growth. So I ultimately started in retail and then ended up in Canada with a startup and then came back to New Zealand and had a shoulder tap conversation one day about heading up to the US to replace the original president because the startup was not going well. And it required a 24-hour yes or no. And then, hey, we're packing our bags and leaving next week. So what do you think? So that was fascinating. I was immediately intrigued and excited. A little bit of imposter syndrome kicked in, but I just sort of popped that out the back because I'm like, you know what, if they're asking, this is a big deal for the company. If it was the first time, for Australian and New Zealand companies that go into the US, that's seen as a deal breaker for a lot, right? So it was very important. So I went and we had real success. We grew sales from 3 million to 27 million in the first year. And then September 11 hit. And, a lot of airlines started circling the drain, if people can recall back then, and a lot of sort of hemorrhaging started happening. But during that first year, where I feel like I learned so much and with regard to be able to pass on to people around leadership, is that I made an effort to talk to every member of the company, which is about 40, 45 people. And then when I stopped, I went around again. And then I went around a third time.
Why did you do that?
Because it was clear people were CYA covering their you-know-whats, and I really needed to build trust as quickly as possible. And I wanted people to feel seen and people to feel heard and to help me understand how the pieces work together and how we could make the company more profitable so we all kept our jobs. So it was really easy. And there were 3 buckets. It was sort of like there was the outside part, which was all the contract negotiation. Check, that was good. The systems, great, that was good. But the people piece was the most fascinating. I think I learned the most about people in a turnaround capacity role as a president of a company because it became clear after 3 go-rounds where the problems were and what needed to happen.
What did you find? What problems did you find and wanting to fix?
It's interesting as a startup is you have to have the people on the ground have to be exceptional. And that goes back to the recruitment process and making sure you have the right people in place. And I think what had happened is it was for various reasons, people had been brought into the company from overseas that were just pretty average. Their commitment wasn't necessarily there. Steve Jobs, people talk about working for him, where he just attracted the most extraordinary people so that there was self-governance of people's input and output because they really enjoyed being part of a really high velocity team, meaning we're committed, we're capable, we're going towards a similar mission, and that was just missing.
So we're talking about working with Flight Centre, and when you went into the company, it wasn't performing so well.
This was in America, yeah. The rest
America.
Of the country, yeah.
Actually, I wanted to find out. So you were based in New Zealand, and
So I worked in retail, and then I went to area management
in New Zealand.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then I went over to Canada, Toronto, to help with a startup there, which went really well. And then the US startup had happened, but I came back to position myself to replace the outgoing general manager. So that's what I thought I was here to do. So it was a pretty significant role when I got asked to go up to the US and replace the original Australian president.
Do you live also in the US? Do you? Or
Yeah.
do you...
So then what happened? A year and I met my now husband.
Right.
And got married and had some babies, and that wasn't what I thought would happen.
Did you stay in the US?
Yes, for 20 years until COVID hit.
Yeah. And what sort of adventures or background work or career that you ended up doing there?
Yeah, it's a good point. So after 2 years, when we started sort of missing our budgets and targets with post 9/11, I was unceremoniously whacked. And it was one of the biggest learning curves for me in my life to handle that kind of swift, how would I say, redirections or, hey, you're not good enough, and all those imposter syndrome feelings that came flooding back. So I pivoted. I went and did some travel, which gave me some good perspective and sort of some breathing space. And I recommend that to anybody. Like if you've got some adversity, getting some distance is actually really healthy geographically and for your brain. And then I started to do some consulting, small to medium-sized business consulting for business owners that are really busy, working in their business and not out of it. So extract them, how to cut the fat. Let's make this thing lean and mean, and work out which people are not effective, maybe that are holding up progress. And then I got offered a job by some clients, and then I had some babies. Ended up doing some contract work with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise in America. And then I went back to a passion of mine, which is real estate. And I started to buy properties to flip, to fix up and sell, which allowed me to buy properties to keep and rent. And then the more I could flip, the more I could keep and rent and and do up and rent. So I just started creating basically a real estate portfolio. Yes. Yeah.
How was that part of your life?
Amazing. It was one of my favorites, one of my favorite missions that I've been a part of. Yeah. A couple of properties I bought, or I researched whether this was you were with integrity, whether this is the right thing to do, but some foreclosure auctions. And you go into a room with 300 people in a ballroom, you had to take cashier's checks or cash, and you would know nothing about the property other than the address. So you couldn't go inside it. And then you would bid. And I bought 2 properties that way. It was pretty scary, exciting, adrenaline. And you had to factor in people might pour concrete down the pipes. But in most cases, what happened, and this was in California, people had been, and I found websites. It was like, how do you stay in your house without paying 1 cent? And people had lived there kicking the can down the road for 8 years or more. So the taxpayer was really paying their mortgages. So when I realized that, I'm like, okay, so I can do this. And yeah, I had some hairy moments with one of the properties we bought. We found guns and kind of got threatened by one of the owners that moved out. And just, it was sort of, it required a little bit of fearlessness. But I really loved the opportunity to take something, strip it down to the studs and create something beautiful, a home for somebody. And my dad was a contractor growing up. I learned a lot about business from him.
Oh, cool.
And so I think I channeled a lot of that. I grew up working on building sites and school holidays. And I love of wood and I love the smell of wood. And the last flip I did was a $3 million property that the day it hit the market with an open home was the day that COVID said there are no more open homes. So again, I learned a lot that way too.
Wow. Did you end up selling that house?
Did, by the hair of my chinny chin chin. Yeah. And made a teeny weeny profit.
But you made it just in time.
Just in time. Yeah.
So what's the collective experience that you've done with the real estate development? Like, did it end up being kind of a big deal, like for you, like a big venture, like a multi-million-dollar sort of?
Yeah. So I think in the last 2 years I was doing, I think I bought 7 properties. And so working with contractors and subcontractors and architects and engineers, structural engineers and cities and permits and, did a lot of the planning myself. I would have been an architect in another life. And I do all the staging myself. So I just loved it. It was a really good creative outflow, plus the ability to use my leadership skills, and then actually work with a lot of men, a very strong, male-dominated industry at that time.
It sounds like there's kind of so many experiences that you've had, like the traveling, the flight center experience, being the president, and, having all these properties that you have to flip and buy and sell. And it's kind of an interesting experience in your life that has helped you become who you are today. Because I think there was somewhere that I was reading about how people who travel and people who experience multiple different things, like earlier we were talking about 40 countries, and you talked about somewhere you were talking about backpacking as well. It helps we were talking about helping perspective. And you have such a heart for female leaders or developing female leaders. Surely that history that you've done has something to do with why you're doing this now. The desire to see female leaders in this male-dominated, some areas are male-dominated, like the real estate market, construction, things like that. I actually do want to ask you the question, do you think enough people are going on overseas experiences now?
It's a fantastic question. And we had talked about this previously, and I did some research to try and find numbers to back it up. And it's really hard to find those numbers. But the reasons, and because having come back from the US during COVID 4 years ago, I've noticed a lot of young adults are not going on their OEs. So, and what I found, the reasons are this post-COVID hangover, which we can talk about a little bit around leadership in a minute, is people are staying closer to home. It's also very expensive. So when I was traveling, I remember going to an island west of Lombok. It was the equivalent of $7 a night, which included 3 meals a day. Now, to go to a backpacker in Sydney is $35-40. You can pay on that particular island. Actually, I did look at it in Gili Trawangan. You can pay up to $100 a night. So as a backpacker, it's actually not as cheap as it used to be. And not every country is paying minimum wages like New Zealand and Australia are. So it's expensive. And also there's much more of a requirement now from companies, fortunately or unfortunately, for people to have college degrees, which makes the sort of transition from high school to college, it's much easier to probably just flow in, as opposed to sort of like I had no idea what I wanted to study. So I actually left high school during my 7th form year, unbeknownst to my mother, who was hiking in the South Island, got a bit of a shock when I came back and told her I was now selling encyclopedias. So I just decided that I had no idea what I wanted to study. And so I couldn't bear the thought of studying for another 4 years. So backpacking was a really viable alternative. Much like in, a lot of countries, certainly not the US, there is a vortex and an expectation that everybody goes to college. But, we have very respectable options in New Zealand. Get a job, go for an apprenticeship, go to a trade school, go for an OE, and which I think is fantastic.
In your observation, you've seen that not as many young people going on overseas experience. Why is this so significant? Why are you bothered about it?
Yeah, it's travel. 2 things I say to people that, you should get your money into is real estate and travel. And what travel provides, and, most of us know that when we go away, it helps us look back at where we came from and appreciate it a little bit more. We like coming home. There's a real comfort to it. So going away and experiencing different food, different cultures, different people, the challenges, negotiating and navigating the challenges, it just helps us to build our resilience muscle, right? We just have to deal and we get to learn new things. And it's sort of like this whole like synapses that fires in our brains. That's a really cool feeling because they're like, hey, I want more of that. But I think when it comes to leadership and perspective, it's a word, perspective is a word, it's my word of the year. It's one that not many people talk about with perspective of teaching it, right? Because it's sort of, I think, presumed that you have to live it to learn it. Whereas there's a book that I highly recommend to everybody called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who was an Austrian neurologist and psychiatrist who ended up spending 3 years in a concentration camp. And he continued his work post being in the concentration camp. He did survive, and with extraordinary resilience. And he showed that this little space that we have in our brains between, what happens to us and how we respond to it can grow. And my company is called the Grow Zone Layer, and it really represents that thin slice, because when we use tools to grow that space, it allows us to, in the moment of adversity or challenge, or somebody says something we don't like, to learn to react more appropriately or more proportionally. And that absolutely helps us, as imperative to becoming a really good leader of people, because people are going to say and do things that might underwhelm you. But if you can grow that space, your reaction is going to potentially, you'll be able to turn that around and empower them or teach them.
So you wanted to develop female leaders. Why?
It's a good question. Why now? Why now is... There's a drought of leadership on the planet at a time when 3 things are culminating to require us to have a wave of leaders ready. So the first is this onset of AI, super exciting. It's really important that companies don't take their eye off the prize, which is the people, and put all their resources into AI. The second one is this COVID hangover. We don't like to talk about it, but the stats now are showing there was a recent survey from intelligent.com in the States that 58% of employers are saying that those entering the workforce for the first time are underprepared for the realities of life. Additionally said that 20% of the workforce are saying that the workload is just too much, pushing back. Whilst at the same time, just over 50% are negotiating wages above what they're credentialed for, or what their work experience shows that they warrant earning. Now, the third piece is where the women come in. So at the moment, global leadership is 10% women and 90% male. And the rhetoric that is being used by global leaders at a global level is pretty aggressive in some countries. There's not a lot of integrity being shown. And here's the thing. If I draw an analogy of a band on a stage and you've got your drummers and your acoustic guitar and your pianist and everybody, imagine there's 10 pieces to the band. And the music is awesome. So imagine if we had 9 drum kits and 1 guitar, and the music that would be being played. And the guitarist says, hey, I want to do a bunch of solos too. And the drum kits are all like, come on, drumming is where it's at. So this is sort of a parallel for why we need half of the population, which is women, and half the population of men, working very collaboratively on solutions so that the music that's played is more representative of everybody on the planet. So my goal is to create this wave of women, and particularly those that are lacking some confidence or the skills, and to get them to the front of the pack so that they're ready. I'm not a big believer in creating quotas for companies, and I know people will disagree with that. I think we need the women in the positions where they actually recruit the right leaders, but that the right people get those jobs. Particularly, for example, let's talk about Joe Biden's decision to employ a female vice president, and that she needed to be African American. He dropped out half the country, and then he really thin sliced it from there. And I understand why he did that, but at that level, those kinds of roles are so essentially important that we have the right people, right? When we have such a massive issue like's going on in the US where I was living at the time.
I was thinking as you were talking, it's a current issue as to why this is a problem. For people listening going, how is this really going to affect me? Like your average person, or the person who goes day in, day out to work, how is that really going to impact them?
It was interesting. I had an accident in my early 20s that really lit me up. It was, I actually had 2 back-to-back near-death experiences that I've used AI to help me determine I'm 0.045% lucky to be alive, let alone not in a wheelchair. So my big mission is to help women in particular go big. And what I've realized as I've worked through some of the cool and the challenging stuff in my life is that we are ambassadors wherever we go for our family. Our parents want us to represent our families well. Amongst our friend groups, like all of those leadership qualities. And everybody needs every group, whether it's, in your church, whether it's in your community, whether it's in your business, we need leaders, people who are strong and fearless and resilient and committed to take us in really positive directions. So everyone has the potential for it. Like, you're not born a leader. I do have a 5-question quiz to help people work out, am I leadership material, which I would be happy to share with anybody, because it's not about arriving as a leader. You don't sort of get there and then you're done. You continually add to your toolkit to become more and more nuanced. And it's something that, as long as you have a growth mindset, anybody can develop that leadership muscle. And that's what I encourage everybody to do.
So can you be born as somebody who isn't necessarily a leader? Like, we're talking about females here.
Yeah.
You're not a leader per se, but you could develop that skill.
Yes. I mean, up until the age of 8, 9, we're really, the way we formulate who we are in the world is largely shaped by our families and the environments that we grow up in, right? So I like to use this analogy. If you just imagine a whole bunch of footprints on the beach, you look behind you and you look at kids up to the age of about 5, 6, 7, there's footprints all over the beach. They're running wildly, having a lot of fun. Once we get into school and we start becoming a little bit more compliant, which is required by teachers so they can actually teach their curriculum, a lot of empathy for teachers, those footprints start to take very sort of like thin lanes, right? And then once we get sort of through high school, and if we go to uni or we go backpacking or we start in the workplace, what happens then? Do the footsteps stop and we live a small life and we stay safe? Or do we, branch out again and start exploring what are the things that really interest me that I wasn't exposed to when I was a kid because my family didn't do that? Do the footprints go wide? Yep. So some do. And some, some people try and really work those growth muscles and they try and live a big life and their footprints are going everywhere and they live, really fascinating, fun lives. And that's what I want to inspire young women to do, because I think, particularly those of us in the world that live in cultures where we're encouraged as women now to go big, we heck should, live a big, bold life.
So how do you know that you're a leader?
It's a really, really good question. So this 5-step quiz or 5-question quiz, really I nutted out some of the aspects that I think are super important. And the one at the top is perspective, which is really talking about, are you comfortable considering other people's perspectives when you are so convinced you're right? And in
other words, what does that mean? And for someone who's listening going, I don't even know if I have perspective and I don't even know what perspective means.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for asking that question. So perspective really is all about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. So I touched on it. Let me tell you a little bit about what happened to me in my early 20s. I was at the end of my 5-year backpacking. Holiday, and I wanted to go home to New Zealand with some money. So I went down to the Central Australia and 130 kilometres west to a little place called Ormiston Gorge, and I worked at Glen Helen Lodge. And one day I was walking and I was admiring the vista, even through the eyes of a 22-year-old. It was absolutely spectacular. And I made one small mistake. I took a step and I slipped into the bottom of a dry riverbed, landed on the only big rock down there. The friend that I was with doesn't remember getting himself to the bottom. So it was about 50 feet, about the size of a 5-story building. I was on this rock. He moved me to the sand, and it was a helicopter extraction and a flying doctor's rescue down to the spinal unit in Adelaide. Fractured skull. I was paralyzed temporarily, partially, broken bones in my ears and my spine. My pelvis was in pieces and an ankle. So they moved me after 3 days from the spinal unit into a room on the end, because I was the only person that had use of my limbs from here down to be able to ring for a nurse with the bell. Most of my learnings came from the other patients. So there was a 17-year-old boy who had been driving this ute around the streets of Adelaide with his friend. And in Australia back then, if it was unroadworthy, they got stopped. They'll stick a yellow sticker on the windshield and you had to get it towed away. So they went back and hot-wired it and were ripping around the streets of Adelaide, slammed it into a concrete wall. He hit his head in the back and was immediately paraplegic. When he came to hospital, there was a lot of commotion, a lot going on. And he came to and he said to the doctors, like, what's going on? And they said, look, you've been in an accident. You've hurt your spine. And he said, oh my God, I can't feel my legs. am I paralyzed? And they're like, look, we're going to, and he's like, that's it, I'm going. And sure enough, he flatlined.
Wow.
They brought him back. So for the next 3 months that I was there, my mum was there for a bit, talked to his mum. What was happening to him is that he was going through from a really funky sort of goth teenage years with long black greasy hair, and he was sort of really into heavy metal. He would ask his mum to lick his face because that was the only place he had any feeling. And she found that really hard and really unusual. So the doctor said to them, if your marriage is not strong, guys, you need to know this is going to be pretty challenging for you as a family. So I had lots of experiences with other patients like that. And I used some tools that I had learned through some adversity I experienced as a teen with creative visualization and meditation to heal myself. So 3 months later, I walked out of there 98% healed.
Wow. That is really impressive.
So what happened, however, was over the next 18 months, I developed a fear of heights. So I decided to kill or cure. So I was back in New Zealand working in retail and flight centre. I went down to Queenstown and I did a bungee jump. And it was exhilarating, like amazing, awesome. And then that night, I sleepwalked for the first time out a second story window.
Oh my God.
And I broke my back for the second time within 18 months.
Wow.
That was when it was one of those, what's going on here? It really made me sit up and listen. And as far as perspective, having spent time in a spinal unit now twice, I realized how fortunate I was that I was alive, let alone walking. So I decided to go big. My dad had always said, sitting on my shoulder, you only have 100 years on this planet. You've got to make the most of every one of you. It's like 100 dinners. It's not many. So I decided to just start taking the fork in the road. Then we all have 100 of those each day. What am I going to have for breakfast? Which way I'm going to drive for work? Am I going to take that promotion? Am I going to go for that job? Go for it. Go big. So I started taking the harder road and cool things started happening. Doors just started opening. I became braver because you just compound. It's like leadership. Anything you do, any of the inner work, you just have to be consistent, right? And just keep doing it. And that skill set gets stronger and stronger.
Gosh, that was like just the first point. Being a leader. I've got so many good questions for you. How can you describe your perspective before the two operations or accidents and then after? You might have touched on it, but I'd love for you to for women are listening, if they haven't had those, life-altering decisions or life-altering moments, how do you shift your perspective without having something serious happen?
This is one of the things that I work on in my leadership series. It's like, how do you inspire people to go big without near-death experiences, right? So we do some exercises around that. But prior to my accidents, I was the kind of person who would jump off anything, go anywhere, let's just try that fun, physical. For me, I was like, okay, I'm brave enough to do that. But when it came to the workplace, I was not brave. And when it came to conflict resolution or having difficult conversations, I didn't have the skills and I didn't have the confidence. So I really learned the hard way. So what happened with those accidents is it's like, boom, why not try? What's the worst thing can happen? I teach a lot about sort of rumination, that sort of inner voice that we just get locked in and spinning our wheels, dealing with the 10% what happened, not the 90% how we respond to things. So that's where I help people to understand that we can shift our perspective by spending time in the 90% of how we respond to situations so that we end up with more positive results.
Let's go to point 2.
Yeah.
What's the point 2?
Yeah. So challenge. There's a lot to unpack there, but the question I put in the quiz is, when a challenging situation arrives, and it could be in your family or your friend group or in your workplace, do people look to you for solutions or advice or input or perspective?
It's a hard one because it kind of depends, isn't it? On
it does.
What is it, like family related or your work? Are you talking about work specifically, or are you talking about everything?
So if we're talking about building those muscles, right? Leadership, those skills are a muscle, and it's a group set that you can just continue growing. So if you lack the confidence in your workplace, practice at home.
How?
And that would be like when somebody does something that annoys you, because that is going to happen in every family. Every family could write a book. Family members know how to push our buttons. Just find a way and pre-plan, because you know probably what's going to come at some point, a way to disrupt that activity and ask a pointed question to get somebody to stop in their tracks and really think. And by doing that, you're kind of requiring them to have a different perspective, to see it through your lens.
Are you talking about thought processes that we are so used to that you stop and interrupt?
Yeah. So let's talk about like a practical example. Might be like you have a friend or a family member that's always late.
We do have that one in the family.
Yeah. So, and for some people that would be really frustrating and others like very laissez-faire, right? So if you're the person who likes to show up on time and, you're always sitting around waiting for this person, consider asking that person and framing the question in such a way as like, do you know how it makes me feel when you're late? And good chance they will have no idea. And, well, can I tell you? Yeah, okay. And it will shock them probably to know that I actually feel kind of disrespected. What? It's really getting them to stand in your shoes and just tell you how the same situation looks and then just challenge them.
So simple, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So challenge is we can all develop that skill set about somebody that people come to when there's a problem. And I think that that's a lot of it is around sort of being a really good listener and a really good asker of questions.
What's the third point?
Third point is initiative. So yeah, when something needs doing, are you stepping up to do it? It's particularly when you're not asked. So for anybody that's, living at home, surprise someone, just take care of something just because you should, just because you're a good teammate. Family members, you're a team. In the workplace, just take care of it, as the paper's running out and the little things. You don't even have to tell anybody about it. Being that really understated person that just sees something need taken care of, because being lazy and, this is where parents, I think, do their kids a disservice by doing everything for them.
Or not delegating.
Yeah. So that's challenge and initiative. And then the fourth one is, I call it other than ourselves, which is really all about ego. So it's a really challenging one in that when we're in our sort of early to mid and late 20s, early 30s, to really be the leader of something and yet be willing to sort of be behind the scenes and not take credit for it and let other people shine is really challenging. But it shows an extraordinary amount of maturity. If you can learn to find grace in being happy for other people and make something or someone more important than your own needs in the moment, extraordinary sign of a good leader. That's something we can practice all the time, anywhere, any place, and just be happy for people. And that means being comfortable in your own skin, which is why we spend a bunch of time in our leadership series working on that stuff. What I've learned, and I've set up a lot of programs and
you've helped a lot of people into leadership.
Yeah. And I've done a lot of just sort of volunteering as created programs. And what I've learned over time is that if you can create something and then when you step away, it doesn't fall over because you're not part of it, that is the true measure of success. I've created something and then stepped away, and because I was such an integral part of it, I was doing way too many things or it fell over. So that's something I hope people take to the bank.
That's a real powerful example of knowing if something is if you've done a good job in making sure that the engine is going to run by itself.
Yeah, well put.
And you need leadership for that.
And then you need to sort of this whole idea of succession planning and tapping people on the shoulder and giving people opportunities to lead, which is something, again, we'll do practical examples of making sure people lead in safe environments where they, it's failing as the science is everywhere. You have to, it's almost a prerequisite. If you're not failing often, you're not trying hard enough. Yeah. And then the last one is fearlessness, which is my favorite. It's all about comfort zone. It's all about that fork in the road, taking the more challenging road. Are you comfortable with getting outside your comfort zone? Our brains are wired so that we remain as calm and comfortable as possible. We go to what's comfortable. So to disrupt that and take on a challenging opportunity or do it a bit different and recognize that we're doing it differently is so important. Because really what I would say is that leaders become people who become comfortable with being uncomfortable.
So this 5 things. So if you could recall them again.
Yeah. So it's perspective, challenge, initiative, ego or something other than ourselves, and fearlessness.
Are women afraid to be leaders?
It's a really interesting question. I think that we'll call them Gen Z. I think this is an extraordinary generation because there is a lot of seeming entrepreneurship, a lot more fearlessness. There are some other challenges I see, but I think there is extraordinary opportunity. I think the glass ceiling, if I to be honest, is with a lot of men. The glass ceiling that they have that women can be exceptional leaders. Look at what happened in the US has never had a female president, whereas New Zealand's had 3 women leaders. A lot of countries have. So are women afraid to be leaders? It's a great question. It's one that clearly there's an issue because we don't have enough, but that's one of my missions is to create this swell and this wave of women to be ready.
Yeah. Do you think that they don't know what to do? They don't know where to turn to become more? They don't have the right circle around them to support them to be one?
Yeah, I think that's we've got this COVID hangover. There's undeniable, all the stats now, that there was a lot of learning that we do during those years from sort of 18 to sort of 22 around, because it's not until we're 25 that the decision-making in the front of our brain is fully formed, right? So there's a lot of our emotional regulation we're learning, which is a lot of response to, uncomfortable conversations that happens. So 18 to 22-year-olds, a lot of them missed out on those uncomfortable situations that we get in the workplace or we get in, real life. We were locked, a lot of us were locked down for a big piece of that. And we learned some really unfortunate behaviors,
Right.
So can I just touch on this? I think this is really important. Yeah. I want to give people a perspective around this. Where I think we've gone in the world, and I think for young women in leadership, if they can recognize one thing, is that, we're scrolling on average 2 kilometers a day now. And call it doom scrolling, call it what you will. That's the average. So some are a lot more. And what we're sort of almost required to do or inspired to do is to scroll, like. So we're judging in a way. We're judging what people are posting. Now, how that's translating into real life is that when somebody says something we don't like, we judge it, versus leaders will seek perspective and ask you why. Okay, what am I missing here? Like, why did you say that? Or that made me, I'm giving you we're going straight to the guns, but that's not necessarily, you'd have a more nuanced conversation, but try and understand why that happened, because that's where the growth is. That's where the magic is.
Right.
The magic is not in here. A lot of people are watching, they're not posting. You can't go into social media and come away unscathed, so I understand why a lot of people don't post. But the watching is a waste of time. Yeah.
So you're on a mission to disrupt all of that?
Yes, absolutely.
How?
Yeah, so I am launching a leadership series in February. It's a 12-week leadership series, so it's not long, but it's 3 months, which I'm committed. And anybody that knows me, that when I set a mission, I absolutely go all out to achieve it. So it's 12 topics over 12 weeks. They're online. And I have 3 international speakers. So we have an Olympic coach from the US who's worked with the US women's water polo team for the last 3 Olympics and won gold. However, did not medal at the last Olympics. And he has a fantastic perspective about women and perspective in leadership. We have a Breathe Like an Olympian from Papua New Guinea. And then a third who is a tech expert that will speak to AI, because if young women are not upskilling on AI, you need to get on that like now, if not yesterday. And then also talks about sort of leading men in a male-dominated company or industry. And thirdly, she will speak to the importance of the inner work. Because until we can stand in our own 2 shoes and feel really comfortable, it's very hard to lead, particularly men. You need to come across as competent and confident.
I want to touch on 2 things from this. Is one, inner work. Actually, inner work will be the second part. But I want to understand this leadership series. Is it stemming out of your own like company or project or initiative or organization? For people who don't know what you're doing, what are you actually establishing now, and what is that vision for that company?
So the Grow Zone Layer, the name of the company. So it's Vicki at growzonelayer.com. If people want a copy of this quiz, is really all about that thin slice I talked about, in our brains, where 10% what happened to us and 90% how we respond to it, and really growing that so that our our offerings and how we package and present ourselves and live in the world is it makes us ultimately happier and more productive. So this 12-week series, I also have some awesome goodies that go with it, some speakers, and then I do three mentor sessions with people. So it's some goal setting, 2 sessions in.
So you actually do one-on-one
I do.
leadership training?
Yeah, which is one of my favorite things to do. We deep dive on what your personal challenges are 2 weeks into the 12 weeks. So you get a sense of sort of the material we're going to be covering, where you think your biggest strengths and opportunities and weaknesses lie. We also do a Gallup Clifton Series assessment, which really is what I love about this particular assessment. It's been taken by over 30 million people, is it highlights your 5 strengths. And the philosophy behind it is that we focus on your strengths, not trying to fix your weaknesses, because let's go for it. Let's massage the good. So we do the first mentor session is a couple of weeks in. We do one just over halfway through, and then one at the tail end, the bookend of like really to summate like where you're at and the path you're on and how I can help you moving forward. So the topics will range, that will cover everything from the inner work to conflict resolution with men in the workplace. We'll do the macro, micro of leadership and oscillating between the two, and when and how and why. So each of the weeks we'll go, here's a topic we're going to talk about. This is why we're talking about it. Here's a story. Here's the science. And this is the how, because people are not going to come along and listen. That's not how you learn to be a leader.
They're going to apply.
They're going to, we're going to apply it, meaning we're going to do an activity where I'm going to put your feet up against the fire and let's see what you got. So there'll be some homework, which might be like, I've got a specific TED talk that I want you to listen to and that we will discuss or unpackage. So all this is aiming to help women, to give them, it's like a super boost as far as getting you in the front of the pack for when a leadership opportunity comes, so that you are fearless enough to put your hand up and to explain to them why. And I give you questions to ask your bosses or your other mentors or people in the company that could be good mentors to you, how to identify those, how to ask them to take you under their wing and upskill you quickly. So we'll discuss all those kinds of sort of helpful like to-do tips, because what this feeds into, to answer your question, is my bigger vision.
Yeah.
And it really boils back to that word perspective. And I guarantee you now, having listened to this, you're going to hear sort of people spat out the word perspective, which, for me is all about getting people in other people's shoes a lot. But not many people teach it. And that's why I'm excited to really help young women to understand that we can become better leaders when we understand somebody else's perspective, and it helps us make better decisions, helps us with conflict resolution, helps us get a better result in our organizations or families or churches, wherever that might be. So I'm going to create a global pods of pen pals. And this is a play on it.
What's a global pod? I'm going to slow you down. I love this. You're so energetic and passionate. But I want to know what global pod means.
Yeah. So pen pals, let's start with that. Remember on the old, I had
pen pal. I think everyone knows what pen pal.
Yeah, I had one when I was 13 in the States. It was great, but that was snail mail. So pods are little groups of people.
Right.
So my vision is to create a network of pods around the world, which might be clusters of 3 women with, say, one in Nigeria and one in Singapore and one in Sydney, and to discuss potentially one subject a month. We may not solve it, but just by learning through different people's ethnicities and viewpoints around the world, we create perspective, right? We're not coming in with judgment on a topic. Let's talk about that Iraq recently talked about lowering the age of consent from 18 to 9 for girls for marriage. And who knows? Organizations, nonprofits, movements might be created. However, at the least, we're going to listen to somebody else, and with the only requirement is that you seek perspective, you don't judge on a topic. Let's just ask questions of each other. Who knows where solutions, or just expanding our own minds and our ability to be more accepting and more curious, and how that will contribute to global leadership around the planet.
Can you develop perspective and not be judgmental at the same time?
Yeah,
How can you do that?
So one of the other big challenges that's affecting young women is FOPO.
I've never heard of FOPO before, actually, until I was reading a little bit about you and about your work. And I know FOMO, but I don't know what FOPO is. So please help me understand it.
So it's the fear of other people's opinions.
Right.
And there's a fantastic book I can highly recommend by Dr. Michael Gervais, he's a sports psychologist, high performance, became famous working with Red Bull when their 2 years into their 4-year project, they were having somebody to skydive from outer space. And he developed a fear of claustrophobia and anxiety getting into the suit. So he talks about FOPO, and this book has a lot of activities in it. We do spend time on it as well. Have you heard of the spotlight effect?
No, please help me understand it.
Okay, so the spotlight effect is it's a phenomenon where we go out in public and we think people are noticing, our hair, something we said. Oh my gosh, I did that. I think, did I mess that up at work? Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed with my friends, or you're posting. So just fear of other people's opinions keeps us, like I talked about, what you've said and done is the 10%. And we spend time sort of milling and rerunning how we might have done it differently, or the conversation, something clever we might have said, as opposed to it's done, let's work on the 90%. So there was an experiment done where people went out in T-shirts, and they were actually Barry Manilow T-shirts. And supposedly sort of, who Barry Manilow is, right?
No.
Singer, old school, crooner.
I feel a bit out of touch.
Yeah. So, and people felt they were really embarrassing, and they would be like, not seen dead normally in a Barry Manilow T-shirt. And 50% of them predicted that people noticed and probably judged them poorly, when in actual fact it was 23% of people even noticed the T-shirt. So we tend to sort of hyper-focus on what we're doing and what we're saying, and it holds us back because we're in our heads, as opposed to just getting on with it. And one of the easiest ways to overcome this is to ask questions. So if you're and the way to practice for people, in their everyday life, you're walking down the street, hey, I like your dog. Just speak to a stranger and just find a compliment. It's also paying it forward, which I'm a big believer in. But asking questions, and if you're in a meeting, even if you have to pre-think, because asking a question in a meeting at work is challenging sometimes, depending who the leader is, pre-think and have some stuff pre-planned, and just ask one, or just put your hand up and just ask it casually.
And what is that doing for you?
So it's building a little bit of confidence, right? And the more you do it, the more competent you get. So we talked about particularly women leading men coming across as competent and confident is kind of a necessity. And it's something that we only grow as we practice it. You can't read it in a book. You can't write it on a piece of paper. You have to do it. And what it does with our brain is it kind of like it's a little nut, and then we create sort of onion layers so that it just becomes our normal.
That's fascinating, the spotlight effect and FOPO. There are two things that I'm going to add to my jug, or whatever it is. I'm going to add it somewhere.
Yeah.
How do your workshops, going back to your workshops, how do your workshops and mentoring help women stand out for leadership opportunities? I know you might have touched on that before, but.
Yeah. So let me give you an example. So the mentoring, I was working with a woman in Sydney last week who was 22, and she is doing the equivalent of sort of apprenticeship while she does her studies. And there's a woman in her business that she really admires who's really strong. And so what we talked about was, I asked her if she'd talk to her about, getting some advice, and she hadn't done any of that. So I challenged her to, and she knew it was coming. I said, what's coming, right? I'm going to challenge you at the end of our chat to either write an email to her, which is sometimes easier, or to have a conversation and just ask for 5 minutes. Can I have 5 minutes of your time? Because I have a question to ask you about my development. And then to ask her if she would consider having, taking some time at some point to actually let her pick her brains, and she could think of the questions in advance to help me become more successful like you are in our industry. And I asked her, for example, Mina, if somebody said to you, hey, listen, I want to, somebody young upcoming, could I just take 5 minutes of your time to pick your brains, because I want to become really good like you are in your role as a podcast host. What an extraordinary compliment that is. And of course you'd bend over backwards to help anybody. So anybody that's a good leader would. So that's that kind of thing that comes out of mentoring. And we spend a lot of time, I spend a lot of time talking about the inner work. And there's a lady called Amy Cuddy. If anybody's not familiar with her, I recommend checking out her TED Talk. She talks about the Superwoman pose and just physiologically what happens to us and the testosterone levels that raise. So it's just really stacking your body and getting really comfortable in your own skin before you go into a meeting, go in to do a talk, go into a negotiation, go into an interview, to get yourself a little more composed.
Do you find it's difficult for women to respond to what you teach, or difficult to implement what you teach? Is the receptivity versus application?
Okay, really good question. Because your first question surprised me. Are they receptive to it? Because I think hands down, women are hungry for this. They are so receptive to it. There's just not many people offering it exclusively for women in that kind of age group where they've experienced life's a little bit hard. They think they're ambitious. Maybe they think they should be ambitious. They're keen, or they're like, I want to get on with this, but how do I do this, right? So we're the sum of the 5 people that we spend the most time with. And a lot of us, particularly through COVID, right? And it's our family members. But are they ambitious? Are they entrepreneurs? Are they go-getters? Are they out there living on the edge? Are they taking the harder fork in the road? So think about those 5 people. So anyway, are people, women keen? Absolutely. This is definitely why I'm doing this. There's a need. And then are they capable of putting things in place? Therein lies the challenge. So my way of getting people to nudge forward reluctantly or is in actual fact, sort of to backtrack that a little bit, is I have an expression of interest, and then I do a 10-minute interview, because I need to make sure that people are, even if they're scared out of their britches, they are willing to become uncomfortable and, to speak, to lead within our speaker series, our leadership series, and to sort of really put themselves out there, because we need to have the right 12 people. It's a boutique course for 12 women, and we will get a lot out of each other if people are playing it big.
Who do you normally go for? Like, what sort of qualities are the young women who could potentially become amazing leaders? What are the potential qualities that they have that you look for to be able to be part of this course?
So the reason for the age group is 22 to 30 because, and I've got somebody younger that's I'm talking to about it, because it's, they need to, as I've mentioned it twice already, but it's just sort of like rubbed up against sort of some of the hard edges, right? And they know
so they've
that
gone
they
through
need
experience.
Yeah, they need skills to navigate sort of conflict resolution, and particularly in the workplace. Once they have an aggressive female boss, like how do you handle that? So we talk about those sort of scenarios. So people that are aware that not everybody's nice, unfortunately. Or
so the kind of woman that you're looking for, like the young women, have had displayed a sense of desire. Like, let's say you've got 1,000 applicants.
Yep.
You've got to have to really if you're only looking for 12.
Yeah. So it's the age is really important.
Yeah.
And it's the growth mindset, which is easily determined through some questions in the sort of the EOI and other questions that are asked. And their capacity to speak up, to go big, and a capacity for time. So we're talking about an hour a week plus an hour of homework and activity and putting things in place. So people who have that bandwidth of 2 hours a week to improve themselves, and more, obviously the more the better. But that would be, with all the busy lives that everybody's leading 2 hours a week. And then for me, it's something that I sort of draw out of people as I talk to them. For me, it's around sort of one question leads to another, and then I'm like, oh, there's a red flag, and let me ask them that question. Or I'm like, oh, I like what I'm seeing, and tell me more. And sometimes you can determine, when it comes to recruitment, sometimes pretty quickly this person is very, very interesting. And others are like, I'm going to have to work hard to work out. They want it, which is like, that's a gold star. Are they prepared to do the work? Are they brave enough? Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I'm answering your question properly.
Absolutely. And I think women seek these things from my own observation, from having, got friends who are more sort of my age or a little bit younger, women needing an avenue to get someone experienced, someone who understands life, who've gone through life, who's done a lot of things like yourself, and they need someone who's able to navigate them through the challenges, especially if you do this every week. Was it 12 weeks? If you do this every week for 12 weeks, well, we all know that a habit is broken in a month. And if you've got the right support around you and the right mentorship, it's almost like a mentorship opportunity where it's kind of concentrate, and it takes, they get on board and they implement. And if they can do that in 12 weeks, I wonder where they'll be able to be. So for the women out there who would be interested in that kind of thing, young women out there who perhaps have been waiting for an opportunity like that to come across, And certainly in my case, if I was in that age group, an age gap, I would be jumping at the opportunity because I love personal growth. I love development. Building women is so important. And it is difficult out there, I think, because we don't have a lot of resources these days. And we're so busy. And this is almost like an opportunity to get out of yourself and work on yourself. Rather than just go and do. This is actually stepping back. It's kind of like the gist that I have. And I'm really excited for it and for you because it sounds like it's going to massively change a lot of people, a lot of hearts, a lot of women. And it's going to shift something in their mind. You know, we talked about perspective and inner work, those repetitive thoughts that are like automatic. And they're actually becoming setbacks for us. And the challenges of judging people and yes or no and scrolling. I think that was a real eye-opener, to be honest. I didn't know that I was potentially scrolling 2 kilometers every day. That's kind of scary. So I think there's a huge potential for this. And I'm, really excited for you. And I really hope that you go super well and you have to go through 1,000 applicants.
And I think the right applicant is somebody that is also looking for community because when you get this kind of group of people together, there's an extraordinary thing that happens, particularly with women, right? We lean in and we look out for each other and we are invested in helping each other grow and learn. So I'm excited to create that kind of a network and the learning and support and safe environment that we'll create so that the growth is exponential.
Plus, I think women they're known to go towards community more than men.
Yes.
And it's almost natural for us to do that. And we want to be around other women of the same mindset. And so I personally love to be around the people who think a bit like me or even better thinkers than me because I want to be better. I want to learn more and not only be mentored by excellent people, but also want to be challenged by other women. Also network and get to know other people. You never know what happens in the future. And I really encourage women listening to think about, if you're 22, think about what's going to happen when you're 32 and set yourself up to win. We won't be set up to win. And also challenge those statistics that are a little bit shocking for us because they're not fun. Who wants to, who wants 10% of a male-dominated? Like, that's not right. So, I'm excited. I'm excited for you and for what's to come. I think you've got such amazing vision and a brilliant story. And so thank you so much for coming to share it on our podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been a real pleasure.
And perhaps final thoughts, wisdom to someone listening and going, love a bit of a boost, a bit of, speak into the people's hearts at the moment.
I think that people are looking for optimism and hope. And I think that we are at such an exciting time in life. I know there's a lot of fear around AI, but I would implore young women to get in there and start digging around with it and exploring it and then couple that with some leadership experience and the world is your oyster. So, hope and optimism, be mindful of the people you're spending time in the company with. That would be the other thing I would say and forego this for a little bit more human connection than you probably have in your life right now.
It's been an amazing opportunity having you on the podcast, Vicki. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.